Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto leaves the village to help Kurama and Yugito forms a harem with Samui and Karui, part 3. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. The feline container shook her head and pressed more into Naruto's arms. Nope, never happened, she said before a clearing of a throat was heard. Both the blondes looked towards the sound to see Darui and Neji standing there with stoic faces. How long have you two been standing there? They said in unison. Darui scratched his head and looked away a little. Just enough to see Yugito pounce on you the first time, he said. I caught a glimpse with my Byakugan, just before you two started using fire. Neji said with his surprise and amazement kept behind his stoic expression. So if you don't mind, I'll begin Neji's examination. I would like you two to pay attention since he is going to be your teammate. We don't want surprises among teammates, let's leave that to the enemies. Darui said, causing the two blondes to smirk, while still in the same position. Hi, they exclaimed in unison, before looking at each other. Once again, they noticed the position they were in and quickly got to their feet. Come on young Hyuga, let's get you stronger for the boss. Darui said before Neji dropped into the gentle fist stance. Darui was really skilled at taijutsu, despite his preference to using his large cleaver sword. So instantly both of the containers knew it was going to be a good fight, even if Neji couldn't take a punch. 2 days later, Naruto woke up with a large grin. He got up from his bed and walked to the only bathroom in his apartment. He looked himself in the mirror and exhaled a short yawn. He traced a finger over the scar going through his whisker marks and grinned. Same shit, different day buddy. Naruto muttered to himself as he proceeded with his morning routine. He left the shower with a short towel and walked back to his room. After entered he began dressing in his uniform. He put on his dark gray cargo pants and began taping his ankles and around his feet. He still didn't like shoes. He tied his shuriken holster to his left leg and grinned. He stood to his feet and got his ninja pouch and secured it behind him, on the left side. He did the same thing to his tsuba, except on the opposite side. After he did that he walked to the middle of the room and did a few stretches, a few kicks and some spinning kicks. After seeing that the items were still on his hip, he grinned. Still getting used to them huh? Kurama asked with a yawn as he too woke up. Yup. Along with the headband over there. Naruto said eyeing the headband on one of his pillows. So what's on schedule today? Kurama asked after Naruto secured the bandages around his left forearm and hand. No idea. We'll most like continue training for a few more weeks before going on a mission. Naruto muttered before he heard Kurama's growl of annoyance. Boring. Wake me up when you head out for a mission. Kurama said as he laid his head back down between his paws. The blonde groaned as he secured the bandages around his right forearm and hand. Effectively covering his scythe seal, which looked like two scythes crisscrossing each other, even though he only had one inside the seal. You can't just sleep for the next few weeks like that. Naruto complained, stretched his arms a bit. The hell I can't. When I was sealed in your mother, I was asleep for a good decade. And when I was asleep in Mito, I was asleep for 3 decades. Kurama roared. Exactly. Don't you think you've slept enough? Naruto questioned as silence followed. He put on his black shirt and white vest and grabbed the headband from his pillow and left the room. When he reached his living room, he spotted Yugito drinking from his carton of milk. Oh, yeah, drink all my milk, why don't you? Naruto sarcastically said as he walked past her. Already halfway there buddy. She responded with a cheeky grin. Yugito was wearing a modified version of her hunter attire, sans the armor, and her shirt was now dark purple. Her headband was around her forehead and her ponytail was covering the tie in the back. I still see someone hates shoes, the female blonde said looking at Naruto's feet. Yeah, you're in my house, don't judge me. Naruto said removing the milk from Yugito's possession. And use a cup, Only I can drink it straight. Naruto said, proving his point by drinking from the carton. Hey, watch the clothes, I just washed these. Yugito complained, narrowly dodging a drop of milk from falling on her shirt. Naruto looked at her and smirked. By the way, why are you here? Darui said, to meet at the training field at 8 o'clock. It's 7:45. Naruto asked with a raised brow. She frowned when she saw him place the milk back in the fridge and pouted. I wanted to arrive as a team. So I brought Neji-kun with me. She said, drawing circles on his counter. So where is he? Naruto asked, tying the headband around his own forehead. He should be on the roof, inspecting your lightning rod. He's still fascinated with the lightning rods on all the roofs in the village. Yugito said with a shrug. Naruto chuckled and led the other blonde out of the apartment. No lightning storms in Konoha. The whiskered blonde said before the duo body flickered to the roof. Neji was crouched besides the 2-foot-tall lightning rod. With all the lightning rods I seen in this village, I'm always seemed to get impressed with the amount of seals decorating them. What could they possibly be for? Neji asked, turning to look at the blondes. The Hyuga was donning a new, Kumo-styled attire. He was wearing a light gray pair of pants, with a white shirt. On his hands were white, fingerless, gloves. On his hips were a dual pair of ninja pouches. Since he was ambidextrous, he had 2 shuriken holsters as well. His Kumo headband was tied around his forehead with pride. It's so, instead of the lightning bypassing all of the rooms, and heading straight to the ground. The seals will allow the lightning to properly distribute its energy throughout the entire complex. Naruto said, walking up to the rod and crouching down to trace the seals. In each apartment there's another rod with similar seals to store the energy. It then provides the place with electricity that could run the house for a good month. And since we have so many storms, they are easily an everlasting supply of power. Naruto said with a large grin. The power plants in the other villages have nothing on us. Yugito added with a smirk. Neji and Naruto stood to their feet and the blonde grinned at Yugito. There was most likely a storm when I went to get Neji, wasn't there? Naruto asked, as Yugito nodded. A big one. Raikage-sama spent the entire time training outside. She responded before they bounded towards the training field. Is that who you got the idea to train outside from? Neji asked, looking over at Naruto, who nodded. Sensei has, maybe, the strongest affinity of lightning release. If the Sandaime was still alive, I have no doubt he'll be on par with his father. I know, because of it, he's extremely fast. Naruto said. Faster than yours? Neji said with the question hanging in the air. Naruto searched his mind for the answer. He remembered the talk he had with the man, regarding his old man. The blonde smirked as he looked at the Hyuga. Nope, my old man's still the fastest in the universe. Naruto, along with Neji and Yugito, were dashing through the ravine in some unnamed country. He looked behind him to see a team of angry Taki shinobi heading towards them at high speeds. He ate in his teeth and continued running. How is it that we were spotted? I had my Byakugan on to its fullest capabilities. There wasn't a single signature around us for a good 120 meters. Neji said, looking over at the male blonde. Not to mention the fact that each of our individual signatures were completely masked. They were smaller than the amount an ordinary animal has. And on top of that, we were using the Maiseigakur no Jutsu. Hiding with camouflage technique, we really shouldn't have been detected. I blame the Hyuga. I never failed a mission until he came into the picture. Yugito said, shooting a glare at the white-eyed genin. Neji mentally bristled at the statement and looked over at Yugito. It's so easy to blame me for your shortcomings. We were most likely detected because of your enormous chakra signature. He shot back, reverting back to using his stoic tone. Yugito growled in anger and prepared to continue the back and forth argument before Naruto yelled in annoyance. Ah, shut up. I can't think with you two bickering like children. He said, shooting both of them a glare with crimson eyes. See as how they stopped talking and focused solely on running. He turned his head to determine if the gap between them and their pursuers has changed. Glad that it hasn't, He turned his head back to Yugito. Yugito, we're not failing this mission, so there's entirely no reason in blaming Neji. Is that understood? He asked her with an authoritative tone. She scoffed and turned her head. Sure, whatever, she said, causing Naruto to growl, not pleased with her answer. I understand, she added, making Naruto turn his head to Neji. And Neji, Yugito knows full well how to conceal her chakra. There's absolutely no way that was the cause of this little mishap of ours. Even if she wasn't, I had a kitsune-powered illusion around our position, further concealing our signatures. I even went as far as to keep it so that whenever a bird entered our perimeter, its signature would remain, and that took a lot of concentration due to the 7 birds around us. Naruto said with a sigh as they jumped from the ravine and turned to head back. Neji grunted and narrowed his eyes. You're right. Taki shinobi are naturally paranoid because the entrance to their village is really a well-guarded secret. Let's just chalk this up to luck on their side, he said, looking over at the male blonde. At least we know we were really close to their village. That was an error on their part, Yugito added as they made up. Naruto nodded. We're not failing this mission. We're going to find and extract our target. Our intel isn't wrong, she's still in the village, Naruto said, looking back to see their sensei appearing in front of the group and firing a series of water jets, making them scatter. Sensei's alive. He smiled, making the others join him in the expression. Darui caught up to them, seemingly out of breath. You guys are fast, he said with a grin on his tan skin. It was always weird to see the normally dark-skinned male, hanged with tan skin. The male blonde smirked at the man. Just what I'd expect from the Yondaime's right-hand man, he said, giving the man a thumbs up. I can't believe I'm saying this, but boy am I glad to see you, Yugito said, letting out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Last time we saw you, you were in the middle of a half a dozen of Takigakure's Jonin-level guards. Neji said, completely impossible for him to contain his joy. It was harder than you would believe, Darui said before Naruto scoffed. Please sensei, you don't have to act humble in front of us. Learn how to brag, the kitsune container said, inciting laughter from the other genin. I'm serious. 2 of them were the Nukenin from our own village, the Iron and Coal brothers, Darui said, making Naruto shoot his sensei a surprised look. Really? He asked before looking at Yugito. Didn't we decide those wannabes were going to be our first targets after we become Chunin? He asked, making Yugito nod and give Darui a mild glare. You just sniped our targets, sensei. I don't think I'm glad you survived, she said, turning her head back to the front, making everyone chuckle. Why is it that we're not already Chunin again? Naruto sighed and looked at his blonde counterpart. I already told you. I want showcase the fact that I'm a part of Kumo's ranks and happy about it. I'm sure Neji wants to do the same thing, Naruto said, looking at Neji. Neji looked at the male blonde. I do, but to do it in their own village. I'm not sure about that, he said with an unsure face. Naruto was surprised. But you told me 3 months that it was a good ending to a revenge story, he said, looking at the older boy. Yeah, while the exams were in Iowa, Neji retorted. Naruto looked at the Hyuga like he was crazy. If there's a village that hates me more than Konoha, it's Iowa. It doesn't matter if I'm a part of a different village, I'm still Minato's son. Neji's response was shifted when he activated his Byakugan to check if their pursuers were still behind them. Our pursuers are back and gaining, he said, making Naruto growl. Naruto turned around and skid to a stop. That's it. I'm tired of running. Finally. I've been waiting to hear those words ever since you first ran, Kurama said, making Naruto a little angrier. Sensei told us to retreat, ditch our tails and hightail it back to camp. I wasn't about to do that, Naruto thought before Yugito and Neji appeared on his left and right, respectfully. You're not about to have fun without me. Matabi is itching for some action. Yugito grinned as her nails turned into claws. What she said, except I don't have a biju, Neji said as the group of 24 of Takigakure's shinobi dropped down around them. Finally, you've given up this little chase of yours. Now we can extract information about who you are, what you want, and who you're working for. One of the pursuers said as Darui landed in front of his team. Who we are? Well, that's easy. Neji said as his Byakugan pulsed to life. And what we want? Naruto said as his eyes shone amber. You're bound to guess that. Naruto said, knowing that everyone knew about the Kyuubi leaving Konoha for Kumo. That became knowledge about 1 week after his latest trip to Konoha. What they still didn't know was that his eyes could change to amber, so he was safe from them finding out who they were working for. A Hyuga. They must be from Konoha. How else could you explain his presence? A different man asked. It also seemed they didn't make the 4 Hyuga's defection public knowledge. Probably cause they want to continue to appear as the strongest of the 5 major hidden villages, which was no longer true. Darui smirked at their speculations and barked at his team. Get to work, team. He said as they split into 4 groups. Ki. Naruto looked at his 6 opponents. Immediately he gauged their strength and determined that half of them were at Jonin level. 3 Jonin, 3 Chunin. Rate of survival, 95%. Naruto droned before they rushed him. I like those odds, though that 5% is inaccurate. Naruto said before dashing forward as well. He weaved through the first Jonin and slid under the second. When he rose he spun, while unsealing his scythe. Instantly 2 of the Chunin were decapitated by the surprise appearance. Be cautious, comrades, he's no ordinary genin. One of the Jonins said as he unsheathed a sword, while another removed a pair of sei from his belt. Naruto smirked at the comment and his amber eyes grew darker. You have no idea. He said as he molded some chakra through his scythe and started spinning it in the air. Instantly the area began increasing in temperature. Sensing dread, one of the Jonin threw one of his sei at Naruto. They watched in shock, as it hastily melted due to the extremely heat surrounding Naruto. The blonde smirked and continued spinning his scythe. Welcome to hell, boys. He said before slamming the end of his scythe against the ground. Instantly the ground became aflame and begun to crack. The flames quickly died off, leaving the ground dead and the cracks showed lava slowly bubbling to the top. The opposition turned their heads, horrified at their locations. Everywhere they turned, they saw the same thing. Charred grounds and a few geysers of lava erupting at different intervals. This must be a genjutsu, there's no way he could drag us down to hell. One of the Jonin seethed through his teeth as he put his fingers in the ram seal. Naruto watched him silently with a smirk on his lips. Not a genjutsu, buddy. You're here, with me. He said, smirking darkly. And you're going to die down here. He said before his tsuba appeared in his hands. He took a step forward, causing the only remaining Chunin to hesitantly take a step back. You fool, don't let this brat intimidate you. If we kill him, we'll be able to return topside. One of the Jonins berated the man. Believe that if you want to. Naruto said, appearing in front of the Jonin and swinging his weapon. It was barely blocked, but the blonde quickly acted and kicked him in the stomach. But it won't change the fact that you're still down here. He said, swinging his arm in an arc, behind him, roasting the Chunin that was about to counterattack. You're all water affinity shinobi down in a place that has no water. How screwed are you? He said after seeing a man begin a sequence of seals. Who said I was trying to do a water technique? Kaden. Enden. Fireball, the man said before breathing out a human-sized fireball. Naruto grinned and stabbed his blade in the ground. He put his arms forward and when the fireball approached his fingertips, he ripped his arms apart. The fireball was effectively split in two, harmlessly passed around the blonde. He smirked before his danger sense went off. He ripped his tsuba from the ground and rose it in time to block the downward strike from the airborne Jonin. He leaned his head back enough to dodge the attack from the man with the single sai. Still his danger sense was up and he quickly substituted for a pile of molten rock. He reappeared to find that the rock was stabbed by a kunai from the sai-wielding Jonin. I figured it out. Everyone heard as Naruto turned to the voice, next to his scythe. We're in a genjutsu alright, With this scythe constantly in our system, he begun before removing the scythe from the floor. Instantly everything began changing back to normal, though the Chunins remained deceased. We were in an environmental genjutsu. The only Jonin to use ninjutsu explained. Naruto clapped his hands and smiled. Congratulations, you've learned of the true purpose of me leaving my scythe. Naruto said, stretching his hand, causing the scythe to get resealed despite the distance between the two. That still doesn't change the outcome of this battle, he said before moving at blinding speeds and appearing on the man's right. Your weak spot, he muttered while thrusting his sword under the man's armpit and continued until he punctured his lungs. He clenched his hands around the handle of his sword and jumped back. He watched as Tusei punctured the dead Jonin. The blonde laughed and he quickly became blended into the environment. The two Jonins went back to back and began looking around for any distortions in the area. He killed our sensor. How are we supposed to find him now? The Sai user asked with panic in his hushed voice. Don't panic, he's not as skilled as the Nadaime Tsuchikage was with this technique. Just concentrate and keep on your guard. Naruto stood on one of the trees, perched as he kept his eye on his last two opponents. This fight is went on long enough. Even Neji is nearly finished with those two Chunins of his. Yugito is down to one last Jonin, and Darui is already finished. Naruto thought, sealing his Tsuba and removing two kunai from his pouch. Naruto, use a bit of my chakra. Not enough for the people in Takigakure could feel, but just enough for Chome could sense. Each of the Biju are connected and could easily sense another Biju. Perhaps if the container of Chome really plans to leave, we can have her come to us. Kurama suggested as Naruto thought about it. That's a great idea. Why didn't you suggest this in the beginning? Naruto thought with a mental glare. If I gave you the answer to everything, you wouldn't learn anything. Kurama simply responded. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and pulsed Kurama's chakra in the smallest burst he could manage. Unfortunately, his small pulse of chakra was still sensed by the people in the immediate vicinity. That demonic chakra. It came from the kid is the container of the nine-tailed fox. Kumo's behind this. Tell the leader quick. The sword-wielding Jonin told the Sai-wielding Jonin. Naruto used the Yuki coursing through his veins to instantly appear in front of the pair of Jonins. He shoved his kunai into their sides, knowing he hit their kidneys. He removed his hands and jumped back from their surprised bodies. When he returned to his previous location, the tags wrapped around the handles of the kunai exploded. Why is it that when someone strong fights someone even stronger, they seem weaker than a genin? Naruto asked the demonic kitsune inside him. Don't complain about your growth. It was beyond complicated to get you to where you are now. Kurama said, making Naruto scoff. No, it wasn't. I'm the best student anyone could ever have. I up knowledge like a sponge. The blonde retorted before he dropped from his position and jogged back to his team. Took you long enough, Naruto. Darui said, seeing his last student appear in his line of sight. Sorry about that, some of those guys were smarter than I gave them credit for. But Kurama did give me an idea on how to complete the mission without entering the village. Naruto said, crossing his arms. Is that why you released a minute pulse of Yuki moments ago? Yugito asked, having sensed the other blonde's ping. Biju and, to an extension, their containers could sense other Biju's pings from a total of 10 miles. If they were close enough to the village, then there's no doubt Chome and her container would have sensed it. This plan will save us from having to infiltrate, but it will also leave the container alone. We wouldn't be there to provide her a safe extraction. Neji said after Naruto nodded. That would be the case, but this Biju is special, remember? Darui spoke up, making the other containers smirk. Did you already forget that Chome is the only tailed beast with the gift of flight? I have no doubt that flight was the first thing Fu wanted to learn. Yugito said, putting her hands on her hips. She could just fly out of the village. She added. The only problem we should really have now is whether or not she wants to join our village. Naruto said with a thoughtful look on his face. Time went by quickly. Before the team realized, the sun was going down. I don't like this, she should have been here by now. Where could she be? Darui asked, standing to his feet. The team had went to another, safer location and sent another ping, 2 pings in fact. One from Naruto and one from Yugito, each 20 seconds apart. Maybe she's already left the village before we even thought of liberating her. Yugito thought out loud. Naruto shook his head and crossed his legs and arms. Again, our intel states she's still in the village. Though a lot could change in a week. Naruto spoke slowly with a bad feeling nagging at that back of his mind. Perhaps, we'll need to infiltrate after all. Neji said with his Byakugan on, watching their surroundings. Darui watched his team with a small smile. Each of them were smart enough to do missions on their own. Sometimes he felt that he wasn't really needed. These past 7 months have been great though. Training them was becoming pointless, as they were already strong as he was. Yugito was always a fierce kunoichi, always using her agility and natural evasiveness to solve her problems. Because of her growing skillfulness with her Biju's chakra, she's becoming one of the strongest in the village. Without Matabi's help, she was still strong, high chakra control, top-notch taijutsu, same went for ninjutsu. She didn't like relying on genjutsu, but she could still adept at using illusionary techniques. Neji, as the newest member of the group, is quickly adaptable. As a Hyuga, his chakra control was perfect, and his intelligence was top-notch. He didn't have a Biju's power to rely on in drastic times, but his Byakugan made up for it. He didn't have a lot of ninjutsu or genjutsu, but his taijutsu, again, made up for it. Now that he was finally able to put his full potential to good use, he was rapidly becoming what the main house feared, a better Hyuga. Naruto, he came to the village already fully capable of taking care of himself. He's one of the most, all-around ninjas ever seen. Having a tailed beast as a sensei since an early age has molded Naruto into such. Nin, Tai, Gen, intelligence, stamina, chakra control, speed, strength, Fuin, give him some odd years and he could be wearing the Raikage's hat and cloak. Not to mention the village loves him. Though it was great training Naruto how to properly use that Tsuba of his. Along with his own tailed beast, they were able to bypass their problem and the blonde was quickly becoming strong in using Kurama's chakra, now being proficient with 6 tails of the first version. Darui was knocked from his reverie by Yugito lightly punching him in the arm. Come on sensei, lead the way, she said making the man smile. But still, given their intelligence, they grew to following his orders. Right. He said nodding. Let's go complete this mission team. He said before his team nodded and they ran off toward Takigakure. Takigakure, prison cell. Takigakure's prison wasn't any different than any other prison in the elemental nations. Simple chakra seal and a cell was enough to keep them inside. But they established cell specially for only one person in the whole village. Fu was held in her maximum security cell. A steel cage, in the middle of the village's largest waterfall. She was wearing a mask over nose and mouth, to keep her from drowning. Said mask drew from her very large supply of chakra to keep oxygen circulating in her lungs. The rest of her chakra was sealed to prevent her from escaping. Her legs were chained together, and her left arm was held in front of her, and attached to the chains connecting to her legs. Her right arm received the same treatment, behind her. A harness, connecting to a pulley system, kept her suspended in the waterfall, to prevent her from succumbing to the effects of gravity. Also because of the pressure of the waterfall, she was being even more punished. Further, she had something in her seal that prevented her from moving when activated. It was a paralytic seal merged with the seal used to contain the 7-tailed beetle. She's tried to override its effect with Chomei's chakra once, and the effect was chaotic. 2 more seals activated. First a gravity seal was activated, multiplying the gravity by 5. Luckily for her, when she disobeyed she wasn't near water, or else she would have easily drowned. And the second seal caused a lot of volts to surge through her system, making her hate her healing powers. After that moment, she never disobeyed ever again, and just kept her contempt to herself. But she's been thinking of a way to counter the seals placed on her, and escaping from the village. Unfortunately for her, she wasn't even close to being novice at seals, and Chome never bothered with the subject. But in the recent months she made a new friend. A man who seemed extremely trustworthy. He didn't seem like a threat at first glance, because of his glasses, but Fu knew better. Nothing was said, but she knew something was off about him. She learned that the man was a spy and that's it. That's all Taki's interrogation squad got out of him, before his body caught on fire. The delegates of Takigakure quickly went over their secrets. As a hidden village, they had a lot of things to guard, so they started with the most important things. In time they got on the subject of their resident Jinchuriki. They deduced that since the two have been seen with each other on more than one occasion, she could have been the target. She was immediately incapacitated and detained. That was a good week ago. Hours ago, they deemed she wasn't a flight risk and sent to have her released. But a situation happened near the village, and they didn't see it as a coincidence. Instead of releasing her, she was fed and once again imprisoned. She could barely sense things while inside the waterfall. But the container Biju pings were sensible to her. Though, she had no idea what they meant, having never met another Jinchuriki before. She couldn't ask Chome why she sensed chakra that she shouldn't be sensing since their mental connection was cut, since the ceiling. There was one thing that her imprisonment cemented though. She was definitely leaving this village. She didn't even want to live anymore. Living only seemed to hurt and her body only knew pain. The moment she was released she was going to sneak out of the village and run far away, where they couldn't find her. Maybe to one of the islands surrounding Mizu no Kuni. All she needed to do was wait for her opportunity to spring out of the prison she was in. Waiting always seemed like the hard part for her. 2 miles from Takigakure's entrance, Naruto stood against a tree with his arms crossed and an inquisitive look on his face. I'm a great sensor, but I can't seem to be able to lock onto our target's chakra signature, or my informant. I really don't like this at all. Naruto muttered while biting his thumb in deep thought. Is there a chance that our goal has been compromised and both of them were killed? Neji asked with his Byakugan on high. His ocular abilities were good, but seeing 2 miles and further into the village was impossible, even for him. But like the rest of his team, his sensing abilities extended past his sight, but only just a few more meters. Not a chance. Specs is easily the best liar in the hunting business. That innocent front of his makes it even more devious to his target. There's even a rumor saying that he even walked a target back to the guild. No one knows how, but he's that good. I highly doubt he's dead, he always thinks 4 steps ahead. Naruto muttered, oddly feeling like Omoi at that moment. I wish I had a camera right now. You look so much like Omoi right now, it's not even funny. Yugito said with a small chuckle, despite what she said. Naruto narrowed his eyes and looked over at Yugito. You know what, Yugito, whatever. He muttered, not all too happy about the mild glare she gave him, almost daring him to say something. We need to get closer so our eyes could plan out our route to and from our target. Neji nodded and they ran forward, keeping their movements stealthy and their signatures undetectable. Let's do this right now. Yugito commented before looking at Neji. Neji, how's our perimeter? She asked as the veins around Neji's eyes pulsed with every breath he took. We're coming up on 3 of Taki's elite guard. Follow me. He said before the team slanted to the right, out of the way of the patrolling shinobi. After a few minutes, Neji spoke again. We're coming up on the village. Within minutes we'll be directly above it. After a few seconds he motioned for everyone to stop and they immediately followed the order. Everyone widened their senses and understood why they were still. Seems they upped the security since I've been here. Darui said with an inaudible whistle, clearly impressed. They've never been successfully invaded before. I guess we should have expected this. Naruto said with a similar inaudible whistle. Shouldn't we just force our way in there and take our target? Yugito asked, becoming a little frustrated with their persistence in not letting them do their mission without a hitch. Darui laid a hand on her shoulder and shook his head. If we do that, there's a big chance we'll start another world war. World war, you say? Kurama perked up from his nap. They can't hear you, you know. Naruto thought with an inaudible groan. So what? If a war is started, then maybe I'll finally have some fun. Kurama growled with uncharacteristic giddiness. Naruto was able to detect. Maybe later. Naruto said before he opened his eyes and looked straight at Yugito, who was looking straight at him. Kurama wants to start a war? She asked with a blank stare. Yup. Matabi. Naruto replied. Yup. She muttered with a shake of her head. Neji and Darui couldn't help but chuckle from the sidelines, to which both the blondes shot them glares. Let's just get to work. Naruto muttered. I'll summon a few hundred clones and transform them to look like bandits. I want you guys to slip through, whatever entrance they use. Naruto said before Darui nodded and they split up, leaving the blonde there. Naruto waited a few minutes, not able to sense his own teammates. He guessed they were already in position before he made the sign. One by one, clones began popping into existence. He was able to mask their signatures with a kitsune-powered illusion. Within a minute he was able to make 100 clones, currently transformed into bandits. He made one more to act as his second in command, before he released the seal. Is this too much, Hana-san? The blonde asked a crimson-haired woman. The woman had shoulder-length hair with violet eyes. The woman was wearing a simple blue jacket, too small to completely cover her own ample S. Other than the jacket, she was wearing tight black pants. A single golden flower rested in her hair and a black bandana was wrapped around her neck. Not at all, Captain. She replied as Naruto changed his attire and hair, as well as expanded in height. Now, changed from his full bodysuit, Naruto was wearing a simple crimson cloak he left flowing open. His pants were black and his hair was black. He rid his face of the whisker marks and added a scar going down his left eye. A large, triangular, captain's hat was on his head, with a single eagle's feather in it. After all, bandits are simply land pirates. Naruto looked at his other clones, turned bandits, many of them looking mean-looking. Listen up, everybody. We'll now be called the Phantoms. It'll make it more believable when you're dispelling out there. Now our goal is to cause havoc, so don't disappoint your captain or I'll feed you to Kurama. Naruto said as many of them shuddered for a while. You heard the cap, get out there and shit up. Hana yelled before everyone started charging forward, yelling their name. That quickly gained the attention of every shinobi nearby, who charged forward as well, meeting the opposition in the middle. Naruto and Hana calmly walked forward, as every dispelled clone entered her, making her more denser. Sorry, Cap. These grunts can't handle a thing. She complained with a cross of her arms. Naruto shook his head. Don't worry about it, Hana, though perhaps we should even the playing field. He said with a smirk as if he was born in his role. Her left hand drifted to her waistline, where a seal was located. She pressed her finger against it and a weapon was unsealed. A golden scimitar was quickly in her hands as she smirked as well. I thought you'd never ask, she said before charging forward. Naruto looked forward with a small shake of his head. I think I got Karui's personality down too well. He muttered before unsealing his own, onyx, scimitar and raising it in the air. The phantoms shall have blood tonight. He yelled before joining his clone subordinates. Tacky entrance. Darui watched his student's distraction plan with a nod of his head. Alright, Naruto's doing his part. Let's head into the village. The tan-skinned man said before they dashed towards the nearest entrance, hanged as the enemy. What the hell is happening out there? The Chunin guardian said before Yugito spoke with gasps of air. No idea, a bunch of bandits are attacking the guards above us. They keep puffing out of existence, but more keep popping back. It's never ending. She huffed out as the man widened his eyes. I've never heard of anything like that. he said before Darui stepped forward. We're heading inside to gather reinforcements. We need all the help for this surprisingly strong force, he said as the man nodded in agreement. After they set off, Yugito cleared her throat. Not it, she said as Neji quickly followed suit. Are you serious? The sensei muttered as the transformed Yugito smiled. Well, you did offer, sensei. If you don't, everyone will find it suspicious we're running away from a fight, she said with a look in the opposite direction. Darui shook his head softly. We weren't even supposed to do it this way, he muttered before looking over at Yugito. He sighed and they split off. After watching him go, Yugito turned to Neji. Where's the target's house at? Neji shrugged his shoulders. I don't know, he said before activating his Byakugan, while Yugito cloaked it in a genjutsu. She's in that waterfall. I think it's a prison, he said deactivating his dojutsu. Yugito bristled at the fact and hissed in anger. Those bastards, she seethed out before approaching a trio of guards. What do you guys want? Why aren't topside fighting those weird bandits? The man said, proving that word traveled really fast in this village, or proving that he was a sensor ninja and could easily sense all the fighting happening above ground. We need our secret weapon, Neji said quickly, since Yugito was a little mad at the moment. There was no telling what she would say if allowed to speak freely. I'm not allowed to authorize that. If you want Fu free to fight, you'll have to ask the council for permission, he said before an explosion shook the high roof of the mountain they were under. We don't have time for that. Those things outside are monstrous. We need a monster of our own. Yugito seethed out, not wanting to use that word, but while hanged as she was, she couldn't be picky with words. HMPH. Not my problem, he said before squinting his eyes. Say, who are you two? I haven't seen you around here before, he asked before Neji narrowed his eyes. We just came back from a difficult mission that took us weeks to complete. I can't believe you're acting the way you are, Baka, Neji said as the man bristled. Look, even you're going to release her, or we are. If we wait, we might get invaded by these phantoms, Neji said, making the silent man on the side spit out a glob of spit and give him the eye. Topside. Naruto watched his subordinates fighting with a stern look on his face. He watched as every so often a clone would be dispelled, before he created another to replace him, keeping the numbers at an even 100. This also showed him how each of the Taki nin fought, so he could deal with them, if the time came. His eyes darted to the side to see a kunai with an explosive tag attached to it, coming his way. He substituted himself with a dead Taki nin and smirked at the man. Pretty smart of you to come to me. The man shot his hand in the air, in a small cheer. I knew I would be right, he muttered, praising himself. The transformed shinobi smiled at that before the man looked at him with a serious face. I knew you were the leader of this constant onslaught of your clones. And the way they're being summoned makes them shadow clones. Only ninja with immense chakra capacities can summon this many. I know, Naruto said with a grin. I'm gifted. So very, very gifted. So gifted in fact, that I was quickly looked upon as a threat. So I left and started this group, Naruto told the man before rose his fist and eased into a offensive stance. Now as leader, I think it's finally time for me to join the fray, he said with a crooked smirk that made the man narrow his eyes and drop into a stance. Naruto dashed forward at surprising speeds and threw a right hook. The Chunin barely blocked the attack, but the force cracked his left forearm. He stifled a scream before he was uppercutted by the leader of the Phantoms. Naruto smirked and hastily grabbed the man's shirt and brought him in for a devastating headbutt. The man stumbled backwards before Naruto threw a punch into the man's stomach. His danger sense went off, making him body flicker to safety. He reappeared to see a woman with 2 daggers in her hand. Dochi, are you alright? She asked with a worried tone as she glared at Naruto. Dochi groaned, still holding his stomach. I'm fine, just a little surprised. Be careful, Zuki-chan, he's stronger than he seems, he said as he worked on getting more air in his lungs. Naruto looked at them before forming a cross seal. 20 bandits were created and joined the main fighting group. They needed to come back, he said with a smile. Did you forget how these clones work? Kurama asked, causing the blonde to mentally raise a brow. I know what I'm doing, Kurama. I'm using these shadow clones so that when I get the memory, I know when to make another. This much mental traffic is as much as I can handle. It's not like their forces will increase, he thought before weaving through hand seals. Kaden. Kan Nami. Flame wave, he thought as he inhaled fire chakra into his lungs. He blew out a stream of fire that somehow bounced off the ground. The ever-increasing amount of flames grew to a size of 12 feet high and 6 feet wide. The other ninja grew surprised at such a technique, and Zuki quickly grabbed Dochi and jumped out of the way. While they were in the air, time seemed to slow down. They too looked to their right with surprise on their face, because the bandit leader was already meeting them halfway. A knife made out of flames was being held in Naruto's grasp as he quickly soared through the air. He swung the weapon and appeared on the other side of the duo. When he landed, he turned his head. The two landed in a crumpled heap that caused Naruto to smirk. The woman was missing her left arm, right at the shoulder. Unfortunately, that was the arm she was using to carry her friend, so he was hurt even further, also missing his right arm. He smiled wide before he laughed. That was fun. Most fun I've had in years. I'll let you two live, and who knows, he said as he eyed their arms not too far away from them. Maybe your healers can stitch you back together. With a technique like your most infamous shinobi stole, I'm sure they'll come up with a way, he said before turning back to the big fight, as they finally let out their screams. He immediately noticed the increase of enemies and inwardly groaned. I knew that was going to come back and bite me in the butt, he thought while Kurama laughed in his head. He had in his teeth and unsealed a scimitar like Hana, which was really his. He liked collecting good weapons, so what? He ran forward at high speeds, while creating 50 bandits. It would have been way better if they were actually allowed to kill them. Only mild injuries were allowed though. He had a feeling this incident would incite a war. It was in the back of his head, but he had the feeling. Rescue duo. Yugito and Neji finally convinced the Chunin to abandon the rules and release Fu, so she could fight alongside her comrades. I still don't know why I'm doing this. I could get put in jail for this, the young man said, with a trembling voice at the thought of being imprisoned. The council will understand that we need Fu now more than ever, Yugito said with a glare at the back of the man's head. Within minutes they arrived at the contraption used to bring Fu from the falls. Yugito simmered at the sight of her sister's prison. Neji's hand on her shoulder just barely made her realize why she needed to be calm at the moment. 10 guards stood between them and Fu, with one of them stepping forward, a woman. What do you think you're doing here? Go back down to the entrance and guard it like you're ordered to. The Chunin looked at the Jonin guards with a frightened look. But ma'am, the situation topside is out of control. These two have seen it firsthand. We really need our Jinchuriki to end things. One of the male Jonin eyed the two Kumo nin in disguise before he clenched his teeth. You're a fool to allow these two up here. I've never seen their faces in this village before, the man yelled in anger. Everyone knew that Taki Jonins were allowed to study the village's ninja roster. And if a Jonin couldn't put a name to a face, then they weren't part of the village. Fortunately for the intruders, they were already in the motion of throwing pellets at them. The pellets exploded in a cloud of both paralysis gas and knockout gas. No matter how much the Jonin wanted to leap from the cloud of gas, they couldn't move a muscle. They covered their noses and mouths while they coughed, before they begun feeling drowsy. Within no time, they dropped to the floor, knocked out, for what could be 2 or 3 hours. Within seconds the cloud thinned out and all the Jonins were on the floor. Neji had acted even faster and quickly disabled the Chunin with a few strikes at his chakra points. That was close. Yugito sighed out while looking at the sleeping bodies of the Jonins. Though we can't let them live, they've seen our faces, she added while Neji nodded. Our fake faces, But I was thinking the same thing. The Hyuga said before he went to each enemy shinobi and slit their throats. No point in exploding their hearts with a Juken strike. You won't get away with this, you intruders. You can kill me, but we'll have our revenge. The disabled Chunin clamored before Yugito slit his throat. Let's get her out of that thing, Yugito said as she and Neji walked to the pulley system and began pulling the Jinchuriki from the falls. What the two saw was a cage slowly moving their way towards them. As the Nanabi container inched her way closer to Yugito, she grew more and more angry at the village hidden in the waterfall. Out of all the Jinchuriki she and her village knew about, Chomei's container was the only one being treated like this. Every other container was free, to an extent. The Ikibi, according to Naruto, was a troubled child, but had the potential to gain control of his powers. But he was not imprisoned in a cage. The Sanbi was the cage of his village, proving that their kind can be great. The Yonbi and Gobi were Jonins inside Iwa, and pretty respected. She didn't know about the Rokubi's situation. And the Hachibi and Kyubi were great shinobi in Kumo, along with her, the Nibi. Before she knew it, the cage was set down and Neji tried to pick the pocket. As soon as his equipment touched the lock, he was shocked. I could have told you the thing was booby-trapped. The two heard Fu, who sounded exhausted. Neji scuffed as Yugito stepped forward, her claws extending. I'll take care of this, she said before chakra coated her clawed hand. She swung her claw and tore through the metal of the lock. The steel door swung open and Neji stepped inside, his Byakugan on, keeping an eye all around them. I'll handle her chains, you explain the situation to your contained sister, Neji said. Yugito shrugged and crossed her arms. Simply, we're extracting you from this damn village, she said while Neji broke the chain attached to her right arm. That's quite a simple plan, Fu responded while Neji came around into her line of sight. She eyed his features as he broke the chain to her left arm. She rubbed her arms, alternating between the left and the right, soothing their aching pain. It is a simple plan, though it took us months to prepare for. Which reminds me, what happened to Naruto's informant? Yugito asked while Fu stiffened. Neji crouched in front of her and broke her leg chains. He rose his head and looked at her. He's dead, isn't he? He said, making Fu look at him. She blushed behind her mask, before her hands removed it. She turned her head to nod at Yugito instead. Though, that's not the biggest problem, she said as Neji walked towards his teammate. What do you mean? Yugito asked with a confused expression. Fu rose her hands to the zipper of her soaked jumpsuit and pulled it down to her stomach. Yugito was getting weirded out before Fu exposed her left B cup. This, she simply said before Yugito quickly covered Neji's eyes. On there was a tribal tattoo in the form of 4, insect-like, wings. Around the wings were a looping design, encompassing the wings. Fu chuckled as she ran a hand through her drenched, mint green hair. I don't know why you're doing that, when he can see through your hands, the girl said, surprising the two. How do you know that? Yugito said, removing her hand from Neji's face, spotting some blood leaving his nose. Control your hormones, stupid, she said, stuffing a napkin in his nose. Yugito crossed her arms as Fu chuckled lightly. Even with Chomei sealed, I still exuberate a cloud of dust, undetectable to the eye. That dust is special because it cancels out any genjutsu that enters it, so only I can see through it, she said with a smile. So I know he's a Hyuga and can easily see through clothes, mine and yours, she said as Yugito covered her chest and hit Neji upside his head. Stop doing that, the Hyuga yelled in annoyance. No, Yugito yelled before she hit him again. Fu cleared her throat, forcing the two to stop their fighting. Can we get back on topic? I'm not sure if you noticed, but we're still deep in the village. So if you're serious about getting me out of here, then you need to pay attention, she said before Yugito rubbed her shoulder, working on reopening her tenketsu around the joint. Sorry about that, what are we looking at, other than you're in the seal containing Chomei? Yugito asked as Fu sighed. Don't you notice the added seals in and around the original seal? she asked in exasperation. Yugito blinked a few times before sighing. Sorry, I'm not very good at fuinjutsu. Never was and never will be, she said before a light bulb shined in her head. But Naruto is excelling at the topic. Him and Kurama even cracked their own seal, allowing him to use more of Kurama's power. Yugito bragged about her blonde counterpart. She was proud at his growth in that area, as he was always useful to have around. Fu widened her orange eyes in surprise. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki is here. The strongest being to walk the lands. Yugito lightly coughed as she turned her head. Well yeah, but I don't know about that, she said, making Fu confused. Don't get me wrong, Naruto's strong. But in terms of controlling his Jinchuriki's power, I'll have to give the title of strongest to the Crazy Eight. Fu widened her eyes and zipped her jumpsuit. Wait, you guys are from Kumo, she said before Yugito and Neji shushed her. You want the whole village to find out and start a war? They said in unison. Fu thought about it for a while. Maybe, she said, causing the others to shake their head. Well, as much as I agree with you, that's going to have to wait, Yugito said, spitting on the corpse of one of the dead Taki nins. Now what's with your seal? Yugito asked, crossing her arms. A paralytic seal is inside Chomei's seal. That seal connects to two more seals that just aren't pretty. On top of that, both mine and Chomei's chakras are sealed, and you killed some of the only people that knew how to unseal them. Great, she said sarcastically while the duo acted sheepishly. Well, let's have you escort me topside, so one of the Jonin up there can handle my chakra, she said before they quickly ran from the prison. Topside. Naruto gritted his teeth as things became rather difficult to fight these people and not kill them outrightly. Just do it, Naruto. If you receive a reprimand from the higher-ups about it, just say the situation required exigent actions. You needed to keep up appearances as the leader of a bandit group that doesn't quit, to ensure the completion of the mission. Say it like that and I'm sure they'll get off your back. Kurama explained as Naruto was quickly reduced to only 20 clones, not counting Hana, who was doing rather well, only because she didn't care. Naruto immediately realized why she was so ruthless. She was filled with his killer instinct and it was clouding her mind to what was important, not causing a war. I'm not sure you realize that, you're not wearing anything that would indicate you're from Kumo. There's nothing you can do that'll give away which village you're a part of, other than me. Everyone knows the Kyuubi went to Kumo, but nobody knows you're my container. So this is your chance to really cut loose and be the killer I've always wanted you to be. Kurama said, making Naruto absorb his words. Within moments, Naruto's annoyance turned into a smirk. You're right. After all, I am your student, Naruto thought as his amber eyes grew darker. He snapped his fingers and all his clones, including Hana, dispelled. He felt his chakra return to him and he sighed at the completeness. Good news, boys. I'm the last one, he said, making each and every shinobi around him become completely cautious. What is he doing? A Chunin male asked. Is he preparing to retreat? A Jonin female asked. I don't like the look in his eyes. A Jonin male asked. I don't know, he's still kind of cute, a Chunin female stated. Would you stop being you for 1 second? This is serious, a Jonin male yelled in annoyance. Naruto narrowed his eyes and clenched his fist around his scimitar. He took a deep breath and dashed forward. Immediately kunai, shuriken, and even various ninjutsu techniques headed to meet him halfway. He watched the techniques and jumped over everything heading towards him. In the air, he wasn't surprised to see a few techniques heading his way already. He sliced through the stream of water and formed a half-ram seal with his free hand. Seeing him still heading their way, the shinobi on the ground formed a layer of earthen spikes. Naruto narrowed his eyes and covered his foot with a thick layer of chakra, before he landed on one of the spikes. He didn't rest there as he promptly pushed off into the large group. Everyone grew surprised that he easily adjusted to the environment. He swung his sword and released an arc of fire that seared through a dozen people. He landed in the middle of the flames and quickly jumped into the path of a short man. Soon his foot was in the man's face. The man flew through the air, into a few others. Everyone started to spread out to prevent that from happening again. Naruto covered his legs in electricity and began speeding through the enemies. All of that happened in the span of a few seconds, before the Taki Nin began fighting back. Naruto's weapon was blocked by a staff, causing him to grit his teeth. Danger crossed his mind, before he was swept from under his feet. He fell on his back and immediately saw a sword heading for his head. He thrust his hand forward, unleashing a wave of wind. The hard wind deflected the weapon. Naruto quickly clapped his hands, creating a shockwave that pushed people away from him. He reached for his weapon and flipped to his feet. After that he charged his chakra, kicking up a screen of dust. When it cleared he was nowhere in sight. Everyone was surprised at his disappearance. Censors, search for his signature. One of the Jonin ordered as a few dozen people put their fingers in the ram seal and channeled their chakra. They didn't have to wait long before people began screaming in pain. A huge tornado was created in the middle of a group, though it was only 10 feet tall. Raiden. Jion. Naruto shouted before a surge of electricity tore through a few Chunin. Reinforcements have arrived. A Jonin yelled as even more shinobi came into view. Naruto looked at them with a twitch of his eye. They had no idea how tired he was from being in their country. He knew hidden villages had a lot of ninja ready to fight should they ever be invaded, but this was ridiculous. He was only one person, but if the Sandaime could handle 10,000 shinobi alone, then he could handle just as much, definitely, he assured himself as he swung the blood from his scimitar. What the hell are you doing free? Nobody authorized your release. Somebody shouted quite loudly. What do you think I'm doing? I'm here to save your hides. Now unseal my chakra so I can go back to my cell for the rest of my 2 days. An annoyed voice responded. Naruto rose an eyebrow. Is that your last hope I hear? He asked in his gruff bandit voice. You have no idea, buddy. You must not realize that we're the only minor village to have a Jinchuriki of our own. And you're about to become very acquainted with her. He said with a smirk as everyone immediately sensed the unsealed power of Fu and Chomei's chakra. Naruto smirked. Her? Huh, well, if I didn't know any better, I would think you were pimping her out to me. He said as the man blushed in anger. Why you? The man muttered as Naruto chuckled. Go ahead and bring the Jinchuriki to me. I'll show you there's more to me than meets the eye. He said just as a young girl was seen in the sky, 2 wings rapidly flapping behind her. Naruto looked at her and they both shared a smile. It seems she knew who he was, just as much as he knew who she was. When she landed on the ground, they immediately shared eye contact, with Fu pulling him into her mindscape. Fu's mindscape. With what to expect from a being that could fly, much of the scape was suited for the pleasures of the sky. Though Naruto still appeared on the very top of a tree, surprising him and nearly causing him to fall off. If it wasn't for his training, he would have. He looked at his hands and noticed they were smaller, so it was safe to say his appearance was back to normal. He looked into the distance to see Fu again, approaching by air. He smirked as Kurama made a comment about her loving to make an entrance like that. She landed on a different tree only about a few meters away. What's your situation, Fu? If I'm not mistaken, before coming here, you were wearing a prison jumpsuit. Naruto said, noticing that what she was wearing was definitely not a jumpsuit. She was wearing a short and sleeveless white shirt that left her midriff uncovered. She had fishnet armor underneath, that only extended an inch or two further. On her arms were white armlets with Taki's headband on her right bicep. She was also wearing a short white, apron-like skirt, with fishnet shorts underneath. Wrapped around her torso and hanging behind her was a long red, cylinder object. Also, of note, her mint green hair seemed shinier, an orange clip was on the right side of her hair, and her orange eyes seemed brighter. Immediately he could tell she was happier than she's ever been at this very moment than she's been for a long time. The only way I can see that happening is with your chakra sealed, but there's more to that, is there? Naruto added with his arms crossed and his eyes narrowed. She nodded and lifted her shirt, causing Naruto to blush but not avert his gaze. He looked closer and noticed the workings of a seal. He tilted his head a bit in thought, before jumping over to her tree to get a closer look. This is a paralysis seal layered over Chomei's seal. Naruto muttered as he narrowed his eyes and looked around it. These seem separate, and yet connected to the paralysis seal. This right here is the formula to a gravity seal, and this looks really painful for you. Naruto said with a grimace on his face, before more flapping was heard. Both the containers turned their head to see Chomei approaching the duo. So boy, can you or can you not vanquish the seals that plague my container? The seven-tailed, or six-winged and one-tailed, Biju asked the blonde. Naruto smirked and waved off the question like it wasn't needed. I can handle this. It's child's play. He said smiling. What I don't know is, if I can remove the seal in here and it takes effect in the real world. Is that possible, Kurama? Naruto asked. If we can find the root of the seal while in the scape, then it should be more than possible. Kurama answered, his voice projecting around the area. And now all we need is to find where the source of the seal is. Naruto said before it was Fu's turn to smirk. You don't have to worry about that, I know exactly where it's at. Just follow me. She said, dropping her shirt and jumping off the tree, her wings flapping rapidly. Wait, the blonde exclaimed as Fu hovered in the air. What is it? She asked with a confusion expression. Do you know what happened to Specs? The preteen asked, further confusing the Nanabi Jinchuriki. Who? She asked with a tilted head. Specs. The man with the glasses. My man on the inside. He said before recognition reached her face. Oh, you mean Jin Shida? She said before her face grew somber. I'm sorry about your friend Naruto, but he's dead, she said as shock crossed Naruto's features. Naruto blinked a few times, his fingers feeling numb. Jin was a dear friend of his. Those two were the closest in age than any other hunter. He felt like a big brother to him, even when Jin was a bit of a smart. That's when something occurred to the blonde. Wait, how did he die? He asked as Fu hovered there with a thoughtful look. I wasn't there to see it for myself, but word is he was set on fire. She said, still thinking. I remember one of the guards telling me it happened spontaneously and his body turned to ash in a matter of moments, she said before noticing Naruto's wide smile. Why are smiling? She asked before the blonde's grin seemed to grow wider. Even without words, he's still lying. Naruto clapped a few times. That deserves a round of applause. He muttered to himself while he clapped. What's wrong with you? Your friend burned to death, she said slowly before she realized that he was somehow still alive. How is he still alive? She questioned before Naruto smirked. The man deserves his secrets, the whiskered blonde said while smiling. Now come on, let's get to that seal, he said as Fu reluctantly agreed. She wanted to know how Jin survived, but she guessed that she would have to ask the man herself, that is, if she ever saw him again. She shrugged her shoulders and flew off, with Naruto following behind. It didn't take long before Naruto had to be carried by Fu, over a river of lava. She struggled a bit, but Naruto didn't pay it any mind. The blonde didn't question the inner workings of her mindscape because he was filled with thunderstorms, volcanoes, and several other natural disasters. He really had one calm place, and that's where he meditates. A few minutes later they appeared at a large mountain, surrounded by dozens of thunderstorms. Though, weirdly, the storms seemed closer to the ground than they were supposed to be. All of that seemed to surrounded by a large glass case, with a long rod at the very top of it. Also what the blonde noticed, was that lightning seemed to be wildly bouncing around the container. That's the embodiment of all three of the seals? Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. Looks like a great place to train. The blonde muttered with a devious look. Hey Kurama, is it possible to make this in the real world? Not a chance, Naruto. Kurama responded with a chuckle, knowing his container all too well. The whiskered blonde muttered a curse and pouted. He was like that for a while, before Fu tapped him on the wiggled him in the air. Well, are you going to fix it? Just because you're short, doesn't mean you're not heavy. Fu exclaimed, struggling to stay afloat with the blonde in air hands. Oh right, sorry. Naruto said, chuckling nervously. Just get me close to it and I'll handle the rest, he said before she quickly took him to the structure. He was dropped directly in front of it and walked up to it. He narrowed his eyes and pressed his hand against it. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Minutes passed by with nothing happening. After 10 minutes, Naruto's eyes snapped open. There you are, he muttered before the entire structure began glowing, lightning and all. After that, everything began shattering like glass. After everything was cleared, Naruto nodded at his handiwork. He turned to Fu and nodded his head. Show me again, he said as she lifted her shirt again. The looping design around the wings and some of the design in the wings seemed to be melting away before entirely disintegrating. Naruto had a blush on his face as he simply stared with a goofy smile on his face. Fu's expression went completely blank as she lowered her shirt. Wow, thank you so very much, bye, she droned out, before Naruto was forcibly kicked from her mindscape. Fu crossed her arms and Chome dropped down, where the structure once was. Cute kid. Fu shrugged her shoulders and began walking to the Biju. Yeah sure, but not as cute as that Hyuga though, she said as she too began leaving the mindscape. Reality. They returned from their minds with not 3 seconds passing. Naruto kept his smirk and crossed his arms in a relaxed way. So this is your Jinchuriki? Naruto asked before he began shaking in a very noticeable way. He upped his inner fire to make himself sweat and his knees didn't want to remain still. You didn't tell me she would be this strong, he said looking at the man he was talking to previously, his fearful facade working like a charm. Ever-Taki Shinobi began smirking at the man's sudden change. Fu stepped forward causing Naruto to step back. What's wrong, mister? Do I scare you? Fu said perfectly following the act. Oh, she's good to follow along without needing to be told, Kurama commented, making Naruto mentally applaud his contained sister. Not even a little bit, Naruto said, trying to prevent his voice from cracking. You don't scare me at all, he said before from the cross seal and making 200 clones. Yugito, Neji and Darui knew the reappearance of the clones meant it was Naruto's version of a signal. It was time to leave this country. All 3 of them stealthily left the area, knowing Naruto would be alright guiding Fu back to their rendezvous point. After that, Fu made a few hand seals, while repeatedly blinking her eyes, hoping Naruto caught on. Hiden. Rinpogakur no Jutsu. Hiding in scale powder technique, she said before releasing a large quantity of powder that, surprisingly, shined with such blinding intensity. Unfortunately, Naruto didn't see her blinking eyes because of the amount of clones and thus was blinded by it. The sensory overload also caused the clones to dispel. After the light died down, Fu noticed Naruto was alone, covering his eyes in surprise. What the hell happened? I told you to cover your eyes, she yelled as Naruto screamed and continued covering his eyes in surprise. You didn't say a thing, the blonde exclaimed with his eyes tightly shut behind his hands. I did, I blinked. How dumb can you be to not understand that I was going to attack your eyes? She screamed now in Naruto's face. Naruto growled and removed his hands from his face. I didn't see no blinking, Naruto yelled, as he and Fu butted heads. Well, you really can't see now, she yelled back with a tick mark on her forehead. Meanwhile, everyone else was also blinded, but could easily hear the yelling. They quickly realized that they were somehow working together. Hey, those 2 are working together. We have to stop them somehow. They yelled loud enough to gain the 2 Jinchuriki's attention. Naruto groaned. Oh, we need to go. How long until I get my eyesight back? He asked while Fu thought. Well, I used a lot of chakra so we can get away safely, but somebody ruined that plan, she said with her hands on her hips. We're still following that plan. Let's go, we're going this way, Naruto said, pointing south. But the others went that way, she said, uselessly pointing the other way. So let's go that way. Naruto said as Fu shook her head. A giant group of shinobi are in our way, she said, grabbing Naruto's shoulders and shaking him a bit. Then, we're going this way, he said, grabbing Fu's hand and running straight at the group. Naruto, stop the shinobi, she yelled before Naruto skid to a stop. Fly us over, the blonde yelled before Fu groaned. But you're heavy, she said despondently. It's either that or kill everyone, Naruto offered as Fu thought about it. Ooh, I picked that one. Can we do that? Fu asked as Naruto shook his head. As much as I would like to do that as well, our mission is near complete. But if we happen to kill a few in our escape, we might be able to get away with it, Naruto said before Fu hooked her hands under his arms and they took off in the air. Let's just go, Chome said as two more wings sprouted behind Fu. It didn't take Naruto long to realize Fu gave control to Chome to help in their escape. Soon the duo was flying through the air with Naruto using the Maiseigakur no Jutsu to help them from being further seen. 15 minutes later they were far enough from Taki that they couldn't even sense the large group of shinobi any longer. Also Naruto's sight began returning. Wow, Chome, you're faster than I could even imagine, Naruto said, also choosing that moment to end his transformation. Thanks, but I still have 2 more wings I can use. And plus, in my large body, I'm not all that fast. Being that big really slows you down, Chome said as the others came into sight. Alright Naruto, thank you for saving my container. This is where we part ways for now, she said before 2 wings vanished and control was returned to Fu. Damn it Naruto, you're a heavy boy, she said, fluttering her wings as fast as she can. Just let me go. Naruto yelled in surprise as he was quickly released. This is gonna hurt. This is gonna hurt. This is gonna hurt, Naruto continued to repeat in his mind as he coated his entire body in chakra in hopes of softening the crash. He landed on a tree branch, but it quickly snapped from underneath him and he continued this until he hit the floor. He stuck the landing with the force of the landing, sending tremors up his legs. Piece of cake, he groaned out, before dropping to his hands and knees. What the hell was that? You didn't have to drop him like that, Yugito yelled with a glare. But he told me to, Fu said, her wings not flapping as fast now as she dropped her altitude, but staying in the air in case something happens. Yugito lost her glare and looked at Naruto. You told her to drop you? She asked with a raised eyebrow. Well, yeah, but I phrased my words wrong. I should have said let me down, and not go, he said as Kurama worked on repairing the fractures in his leg bones. You're gonna need to stay off your feet for half an hour, while I fix you, Kurama said in a not so enthusiastic tone. Look, Kurama said, I need to stay off my feet. I have a few fractures from the fall. How long until we reach the boat? He asked as Darui stepped forward and picked him up bridal style. 2 hours at our earlier pace, Neji answered while glancing at the broken tree. If they happen to come this way, they'll know which way we're going, Neji said, causing Naruto to groan. Seal the entire tree then. We'll use it for lumber or something. We just need to hurry up back to the village. I'm hungry, Naruto said, causing Neji to chuckle softly. Of course you do, he said, causing Naruto to glare at him. Darui chuckled as well before the guys took off. Yugito and Fu looked on in confusion, maybe it was a guy thing. They shrugged and they set off towards this country's docks, anxious to get home and tell the Raikage the good news. They were bringing home another Jinchuriki. When the team arrived at the village, with Fu in tow, the sun was just going down. Even then, the villagers were still going about their business. When they looked at the group, they couldn't help but murmur to their neighbor about the new female container. Fu's eyes continued to switch between the back of Naruto and Yugito's head, her ears only picking up shock and awe, while her eyes picked up amazement and curiosity. Alright Fu, when you see the Raikage, don't freak out, Neji said from beside the young woman, causing her to look his way. Why would I freak out? She asked before it started raining hard, lightning flashing and thunder began booming loudly. Fu jumped in surprise at the suddenness of the storm. Naruto chuckled at her, as their clothes quickly became soaking wet. The villagers chose that moment to make their way. Neji and Darui picked up their speed as well. Let's get to the wreckage quickly before we get electrocuted. The Jonin said as Naruto groaned. I don't see a need for that since I'm already here. A said from a roof, barely heard between the multiple thunder booms. The wreckage was cloakless and hatless, only wearing his giant gauntlets. Everybody looked in his direction and groaned, minus Naruto who was grinning widely as lightning struck right behind the Yondaime, silhouetting his body. Wonderful seeing you out here, sensei. Looks like we got here at the perfect time. The young blonde said as a shared his grin. Why is he so huge? Fu exclaimed in surprise, as everyone laughed. That you did, so I see your mission was a huge success. Excellent. We'll handle the paperwork after training. My deepest apologies, young lady. The wreckage said with a nod of his head, before turning to his apprentice. Come, let's pick up where we left off at, he said before turning and jumping away. The blonde smirked as his eyes turned amber and slits formed from his pupils. Yay, let's, he said as he followed the leader of the village. Everyone wasn't in disbelief. They had learned to live with those two monsters and their habits. Well, I guess you aren't official as of yet. And you even get to live through your first storm. Neji said as he looked at the Jinchuriki, only to see her jump and follow the others, narrowly dodging bolts of lightning. Her body was already used to being soaked from her time in the waterfall. Neji sighed when he saw her follow the others. She's gonna be just like they are, he muttered. Yugito patted his shoulder with a chuckle, being silently for a while. Yup. She grinned widely and followed suit. Neji and Darui were left alone in the rain, their heads hung as if they had been forgotten. I'm sorry, Neji-kun, it's going to be even longer before you get used to their behavior. Fu already seems right at home with them, I can tell she's going to enjoy living here. The Jonin said as he began leaving as well, to go home and get out of his clothes so he doesn't catch a major cold. The Hyuga sighed and journeyed to his own home to do the same, though not before sneezing. The young blonde caught up to his sensei and immediately went for a punch, moving at high speeds. Saw this and blocked the strike, and closed his hand around Naruto's before throwing him straight into the air. Naruto yelped in surprise at the choice of direction and quickly covered his body in lightning chakra before a lightning bolt chose him as his target. In a flash of light, his body was hit. He clenched his teeth from the hit, his lightning armor shining brighter with the addition of the natural lightning. Watched as the blonde began falling now, the lightning seemingly to overpower the young Jinchuriki once again. He was glad to see the blonde land on his feet. He was surprised when the blonde instantly vanished, faster than he's ever moved before. Naruto clenched his teeth even more when he reappeared in front of the wreckage and went for another punch, this one landing on the man's chest. I actually winced from the strike, before the young blonde sent another and even more, all in sequence and milliseconds apart. After the 10th consecutive hit, I finally had enough and blocked the next one and swung back. By this time, Naruto had landed from being airborne in his combo, and swiftly and successfully evaded the attack. So you think you're getting better because you got a little help from some lightning. Said as lightning hit his body at that moment, causing his hair to stand up from the power output. Naruto hastily jumped back, as the wreckage gave chase, more lightning strikes hitting around them as they began exchanging strikes in high speeds. This is what Fu and Yugito saw when they arrived at the training ground, stopping only when lightning struck directly in front of them. I hope you aren't wearing metal panties, because these guys just attract lightning with their fights. Yugito said as they peeked over a boulder, barely seeing their clashes. Fu looked in wonder as she watched, barely feeling any of Kurama's power coming from the blonde. Wow, they're so fast, she said before seeing a gorge form in the ground, a horizontal bolt flashing and fading in existence just as the vertical bolts of lightning seemed to be doing. Yeah, those two never miss a storm and always fight like this. Yugito replied, jumping slightly when a bolt hit beside her. Can we go now? I'm not a lightning freak like those two are, she said, pulling at Fu's arm. Plus, shouldn't lightning hurt you even more so than anything? You do fly, you know. Fu scoffed at that and waved it off. I'll be fine. I have a bit of an affinity to lightning myself. Yugito scoffed back. Flashing lightning isn't a good example of an affinity for lightning. Fu turned to the girl and smirked. It's better than yours, Firecat, she said, making the blonde bristle at the comment. We'll handle this at another time, Yugito said before, turning her attention back to Naruto and Ai's sparring. Fu chuckled, loving the chance to fight against her contained sister, they being the only females of the 9. Yugito did the same, as if reading her mind. Ki. A series of lightning strikes flashed throughout the area, each only seconds apart as the fight only seemed to intensify. The Raikage's lightning armor was bright yellow, testament to how much lightning he was struck with. Naruto's lightning armor, on the other hand, had tinges of crimson in them, chakra tails forming around him, 3 in total. His body was keeping the power contained. Kurama was keeping it intact rather well with no difficulty. Your body is handling this lightning well. I would say, without me, you could easily handle a tail's worth of lightning. Kurama told Naruto, who clenched his teeth and instantly threw about 24 punches and kicks at the Raikage. A quickly blocked most and even threw his own barrage of punches at the smaller blonde. After a precise strike, Naruto was sent flying through the air, before sliding along the ground. He grunted and quickly held up his arms, seeing Ai's arm appearing in front of him in his classic lariat. Again he was sent flying across the air, the bones in his arms splintered under the pressure of the attack. By the time his back collided with the first of 5 boulders, he felt them quickly healing under Kurama's constant stream of chakra. When his body came to a stop, he was on his back groaning from the attack. Damn, his lariat hurts even with all the protection I had around me, he muttered as lightning flashed in the air once more, showing Ai's descending body falling down, his attack an axe kick. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki acted quickly and vanished from that spot, as Ai's kick shattered the ground, arcs of electricity spreading out wildly. Naruto formed a single seal, feeling the lightning inside of him going wild. His instincts told him to quickly release the energy before it tore him apart from the inside out. But until this fight was actually over, ninjutsu was never allowed. It was pure taijutsu, and Naruto relished the moments when he and his sensei went toe-to-toe. So he did the next best thing and amplified his lightning armor, making a small crater from his power outage. His lightning turned from bright yellow to a shiny gold, his amber eyes shined brightly as well before he roared. Another tail formed behind him and he dropped on all fours before charging towards A. The Raikage saw this and knew the blonde was still in control of his actions, and he swiftly evaded his wide swipe of his elongated claws. He did the same to the chakra tails that bursts from the ground below him, appearing for only a second before he vanished once again for each of the tails. He reached out with his bare hands and grabbed the 4th tail and yanked it back. He was surprised when it simply broke and Naruto appeared behind him, his 4 tails grabbing each of his limbs. While Naruto was in the process of his attack, powered up even more. The tails broke and he swiftly backhanded the blonde. At least that's what it looked like. Naruto evaded the counterattack with pure speed and appeared just in front of Yugito and Fu, as the storm above them came to a stop. He looked up at the clearing sky. This storm didn't last that long, he said, his voice a bit distorted with all the power surging through his veins. It wasn't long after that the arcs of lightning around him began shooting out. Like all times before, he stood still, face towards the sky as he felt the nature chakra of lightning shooting out of him. He was waiting until he felt his chakra and the nature chakra to balance out, to strengthen his control over the element and maybe even learn how to bend it to his will like he has with wind and fire. Everybody watched silently, as the lightning continued to cackle around the blonde, who was standing there, the gold electricity surging and moving around wildly, not unlike how fire would spread around. He took a deep breath before he raised his fingers to the sky and watched as lightning shot from them. He did it again, this time at a boulder across the ruined land, and watched as it shot out and destroyed the boulder in a split second. He kept his face straight as he concentrated on the nature chakra emitting from the electricity inside of him. He shot the lightning about a dozen more times, destroying more boulders and splitting clouds in the sky. It didn't take long before he ran out of the nature chakra that was inside of him. The entire time he was concentrating as to how the lightning's nature chakra acted when it was outside of his body. He knew there was some way to use lightning without having to be struck by over 100 million volts of lightning each time he wanted to use it. From his basic knowledge of lightning, he had to agree that it was created from an imbalance. He spread his arms out as he narrated. There was nature chakra all around them, both positive and negative chakra. They were in a perfect balance that when separated resulted in instability and chaos. Naruto moved his arms around, using his knowledge of nature chakra to separate the yin and yang chakra around him. For a while nothing happened, but after 2 complete minutes arcs of electricity began appearing around his fingers. The blonde's eyes were still closed so he couldn't see the imbalance he made from the positive and negative energy he made. Almost there, now you have to restore the balance you disturbed. Gather the energies back together and in that instant release it. Guide it to your target and you will make lightning. Kurama spoke, seeing everything that was happening, despite the blonde having his eyes closed. Naruto listened to the words of the Kyuubi and closed the bridge between the two energies and directed it forward, at a lone tree. A bright flash of light erupted in that instant, a boom of thunder sounded in the air a split second later. The light subsided just as fast as it appeared and what remained of the tree was on fire. Naruto opened his eyes and smiled at the results. He had done it. He had created lightning and released it, without the use of hand seals, without the use of his chakra. It was as Mother Nature had intended, a force of nature. Not the man-made, chakra-controlled lightning you see these days. From what he understood, chakra-controlled lightning had about 1/10 of volts a natural lightning strike had. And the lightning bolt he had just created was the real deal. Don't get too full of yourself. Those 2 minutes makes your use of that technique impossible in an actual fight. Kurama said as if reading the blonde's private thoughts. The blonde was about to retort, before he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned his head to see a there with a big grin on his face. Congratulations Naruto-kun, I couldn't sense an ounce of chakra being used just now. Your prowess with senjutsu is something unheard of in all of the elemental nations. The Raikage praised his student once more, feeling as if that's all he's been doing since he met the blonde. Naruto bowed to the Raikage and smiled. Thank you sensei. It's not all the way complete, but when it is, I'll be working my way up to wearing that hat. He said, making the man laugh and slap his shoulder in amusement. You've got a long way to go before you can don this piece of attire. I said before smirking, and a lot of growing up to do runt. He said before laughing more, making the short blonde growl from the jab at his height. From what I know, the Sandaime Tsuchikage is even shorter than me and even older than you. Naruto said as they began their walk back to the village, the other 2 Jinchuriki meeting them and walking with them as well. Yugito hugged her partner and Fu gave him a nod of approval. Well, little old Unoki is a prick. And it's a whole other ball game if he knew your heritage and location. He still has 2 containers of his own and a nasty temper towards the past. It'll take a world war to stop him from enacting his revenge on your father by killing you. Said as Naruto nodded, Kurama nearly salivating at the prospect of a world war. Unknown location. Small lanterns, holding even smaller candles were shining light in the dark cave. The lanterns, sitting on poles jammed into the ground, formed a circle around a single individual who was bowed on a single knee, his head down and body covered by a dark cloak. Around him stood 9 individuals, all cloaked in black robes sporting red clouds. The other 9 were showing signs of being holograms, spectral figures in separate locations. They each stood on platforms, raised from the ground and forming an even wider circle around the bowing figure below. The leader of the group of individuals was on the highest platform, his unique ripple-like eyes being the only distinguishing aspect of his character. I have news on the Jinchuriki front of our operation, Leader Sama. One of the individuals spoke, though 2 voices were heard from him. The leader only stared at the man, who looked like a humanized Venus flytrap. The 9 Tails has made itself known. He's revealed himself to be a shinobi of Kumo. The leader nodded at the news. That puts a hamper in our plans for taking Kumo's containers. He simply said, while someone had more of a vocal response. Holy shit. Kumo. That's 3 of the Urs in one spot. A man named Hidan spoke in a loud tone. Yes, that makes your target even more difficult to get. We already had to worry about the Hachibi who already has full control of his beast and can transform with ease. Hidan's partner, Kakuzu, spoke with a calm tone. Despite the disturbing news, the bottom of his face covered by a mask and a white hood covering his head, leaving only his eyes visible. That's not everything. Tell them the same thing you told us. Zetsu, being the name of the 2-in-1 plant man, spoke to the man on the ground. With his turn to talk initiated, the person stood to their feet, their features covered by the hood from the cloak. Naruto-kun isn't the only new addition to the village hidden in the clouds. 4 days prior he, along with the Nibi container and the Hyuga the blonde took from Konoha 7 months ago, launched a mission that was ultimately successful. He and his team raided Takigakure and liberated the Nanabi from the village and took her to Kumo as well. Silence filled the cavern as the news was mulled over by the group. Quote! Hidan yelled everyone's thoughts. Kumo's becoming a hotspot for these Jinchuriki. Makes Samahata anxious to try out all the delicious chakra they all have. A tall humanized shark man spoke with a wide grin, his razor-sharp teeth being more than visible in the cave. Calm yourself, Kisame. A plan is needed now more than ever. A single Jinchuriki, despite their experience, is still a major threat and shouldn't ever be taken lightly. 4 in the same village, like Leader Sama said, puts a hamper in our plans. Itachi spoke with a calm voice not unlike the leader, his Sharingan piercing through the dark of the room. Ah, come on Itachi, a man with your ocular abilities, even you must be itching to go toe-to-toe with just one of those Jinchuriki. Kisame quipped at his partner with his grin widening. Itachi didn't show a single twitch of his eye in response to the former mist shinobi's words. A growl and a sneer were directed at Itachi from Deidara. There he goes acting all cool again because of those eyes. I say you just send me in there and I'll drop a giant piece of art on the whole village. We'll collect the bodies afterwards. A soft groan was heard besides the blonde bomber. As much as I hate waiting, your poor excuse for art lacks the refinement to do the job properly. The words of Sasori were heard, as Deidara directed his hate towards his partner. Silence. The simple command from the leader hushed the obvious retort that was going to come from Deidara. The blonde man ed his teeth and turned his head back to the leader. Let's do a recap from 1 to 9. Tell me where they're at. He spoke to Zetsu. Ikibi no Shukaku, contained inside of Sabaku no Gara, is in the village of Suna. Nibi no Nekomata, contained inside of Ni Yugito, is in the village of Kumo. Sanbi no Isobe, contained inside of Yagura, is in the village of Kiri. Yunbi no Goku, contained inside of Roshi, is in the village of Iwa. Gobi no Kukuo, contained inside of Han, is in the village of Iwa. Rokubi no Seiken, contained inside of Utakata, is in the village of Kiri. Nanabi no Chome, contained inside of Fu, is in the village of Kumo. Hachibi no Gyuki, contained inside of Karabi, is in the village of Kumo. And lastly, Kyubi no Kurama, contained inside of Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, is in the village of Kumo. The white and black halves of Zetsu listed the Jinchuriki. Everyone nodded at the information. Suna had 1, Kiri and Iwa had 2 each, and Kumo had 4. I think going after the strongest will prove more logical. We should go after Naruto-kun first. He has the most potential and will undoubtedly prove more detrimental to our plans if he's allowed to grow even stronger. Itachi Uchiha spoke calmly as that was his target while in the Akatsuki. Everyone had to agree with the Uchiha's words. That does make sense. He's the youngest of the group and already has the skill to cause village-wide panic. From what I've seen, he has a peculiar ability to use wind and fire without the use of a single hand seal. The lone figure down below spoke, while the Akatsuki were clearly impressed with that knowledge. I wonder what kind of ability I'll get from his heart. Kakuzu spoke with a sadistic tone. Jashin would surely praise me when I kill that little bitch. Hidan spoke with a crazed look in his eye. He'd make a fine piece to my collection. Sasori simply said. I'll definitely model a bomb out of him after I kill him. Deidara said with a laugh. Samahade can't to taste his chakra and skin him alive. Kisame smirked, gripping the handle of the sentient weapon on his back. Itachi and the only female member of the group remained quiet as everyone spoke their desire to get the blonde Jinchuriki. Even the leader had something to say about this. Good thinking, Itachi. Go and get us a fox. He said as the Uchiha nodded and everyone began blinking out, save for the leader, who looked down at the hooded man. And you, if you still express a desire to join the Akatsuki, collect the ring from our former member Orochimaru. Do you think you could do that, Jin? The newly revealed Jin Shida removed his head, his glasses shining from the candle light. He was a teen, age 17, but already considered S rank. He was never a shinobi in any of the hidden villages, neither major nor minor, so he didn't wear a forehead protector. His violet hair was very light, nearly white. It was a bit long, reaching the tip of his neck, and a few strands of hair constantly fell over his glasses. It was straight, where the very tips of each of the strands of hair were actually white in color. His glasses were rectangular and rimmed with a light gray. His clothes were unknown as he was wearing his cloak, but it was obvious said cloak wasn't like the others. His was purely black, having no red clouds as he wasn't intending to let anyone know he was affiliated with the Akatsuki. Jin lifted his head to look at the leader's rippled eyes, his glasses losing their shine and showing a kind face. A face that many wouldn't believe could ever be done for evil. Of course I can. Once I track the snake down, finding the hand Itachi cut off will be a piece of cake. He answered as the leader nodded and flickered out, leaving Jin alone. After Jin saw he was alone, he grinned and turned around, exiting the cave. Let's see how you handle this, Naruto-kun. He muttered before looking to his left. A man's body lay there, clearly alive but unconscious. He picked the missing nin up and renewed his journey to Tsuchi no Kuni to turn the man into the guild in the country. The next day, Naruto stood in front someone's door, hand raised and unmoving. He knew someone was inside, their chakra clearly inside to his senses. Brat, what's taking you so long? Hurry up and knock, Kurama told him as Naruto shook his head of the cobwebs in his head. He knocked once, moving to knock again before the door was open. Samui-chan, would you like to go? His words slowed as he saw the incredibly ample teen wearing nothing but a damp towel around her hair. Out, for breakfast. He finished as he fought to keep his eyes from dropping to look at her bare body, a blush deep on his face. I thought you'd never ask. Come on in while I change into something more comfortable. She spoke, turning and walking in the house, a certain change in her walk as she noticeably swayed her hips to Naruto's gaze. The blonde boy couldn't tear his eyes away from Samui's rear as she walked to her room in the most seductive manner he's ever seen her walk in. Wow, I've never seen this side of Samui before, I love it. The Uzumaki thought as he sat on her couch. All I know is, you need to see this side of Samui every day, for at least twice a day, minimum. Kurama said as he and Naruto thought of what they could do to that body. Sometimes it was a good thing to have a closet pervert sealed inside of you. They both heard the small sound of approaching footsteps and saw Samui walking into the room, wearing her usual attire. Her headband was in her hand. She had tossed the towel she had used to dry her hair on the couch beside him. So where are we going to go for this breakfast you suggested? She said as Naruto stood to his feet, his cheeks still red. He shrugged and rubbed his head. Honestly, I'm hungry for something else right now, he said without thinking as Samui shared his blush, as if knowing what the blonde was thinking. Oh Naruto-kun, you're still so young to be thinking like that, she said going to kiss his cheek, right on his whisker marks. I'll just keep teasing you until you come of age, she whispered in his ear, making the shorter blonde shiver from the feeling. Naruto shook his head and watched the older blonde walk off, her hips swaying once again. Oh that little temptress, you got a bright future ahead of you Naruto. Protect this for as long as you live, or I'll never forgive you. Kurama spoke while Naruto followed. Cool your hormones Kurama, Naruto thought to the fox, though he couldn't deny that he was feeling the same way. Ki. Naruto stretched as he spent a good half-hour eating with Samui. They only had eggs and toast with some juice, but it felt like they had the breakfast of champions. Actually being in Samui's presence, without either of their teams being around, was extremely relaxing. Naruto found that Samui was more talkative and didn't have to constantly keep a straight face. Her smile was rather beautiful and Naruto loved that she wore it for most of the time they spent together. He would still be with her right now, but her team found her and they left for a mission. He didn't know what kind of mission it was, or its rank, but he was sure either her or Karui would tell him about it when they got back. Naruto Oni-chan, the blonde heard, causing him to turn his head to see his young friend. A boy around the age of 9, who grew attached to the blonde and admired him. The blonde couldn't help but feel the same towards the little boy, their age difference not being that far apart. What the blonde saw was a little boy, dark-skinned with white hair, and he only seemed to be 3 foot and 5 inches tall. He was wearing a white shirt with light gray shorts. His feet were wrapped in bandages exactly like the blonde. A large smile was on his face as he ran towards the blonde, his arms out. Naruto smiled as he watched the young boy run towards him. He opened his own arms as the boy jumped into them. At least that's how it seemed, as the boy continued to float through the air until falling onto the floor. Naruto chuckled as he saw that happen. You should know by now, Saizo-san, you got to be faster than that to get the hug, he said as the boy looked at him, puffing out his cheeks in childish anger. You always do that. I swear I'm going to beat you up one day, he said running up to the blonde, swinging his arms wildly. Naruto laughed and stopped him with a finger on his forehead. You know you'll have to actually pass the academy before you can say things like that, he said listening to the boy struggle against his finger. Saizo quit trying to use brute force against Naruto's finger and stopped moving. No the hell I don't. You didn't, he yelled making the Namikaze smirk. Of course, I didn't need to. By the time I was your age, I already had real-life experience beyond the amount any child should have. The container bragged, leaving out how he had help from his resident furry fox. Saizo did his best to glare at the Namikaze and pointed his finger at him. Then if that's what I need, train me. He didn't ask, he more than demanded it from the blonde. This wasn't anything new. Saizo was always commanding him to train him. It was really adorable every time it happened because he remembered those days. He never commanded Kurama to teach him a new technique or anything. But he was very persuasive with his words. He shook his head. He was actually thinking of going along with the little boy's requests. You know you aren't ready to teach. You're still in training yourself, Kurama reminded the blonde who smiled at the boy. Sorry kid. Perhaps in a few years, he said as he ruffled the boy's hair. Now, go on back to your mom. Spend any longer away from her and you know how worried she'll get. Saizo gave the blonde one last glare, before smiling brightly. Okay, I'll see you later Naruto Oni-chan, he yelled as he ran off, back to his mom. Naruto shook his head and gave a soft yawn. He had no idea what he had planned for the day. He hated days off and he really didn't feel like training at the moment. So, with nothing to do, he was forced to wander around the village. He looked around the village, waving at a few people he saw and smiling at the rest. He was bored and naturally found himself at the edge of the village, in the training field. As if they had been waiting for him, Naruto saw the twin Hyugas waving at him. He noted the veins around their eyes were swelled, before they went away. "Just the boy we wanted to see," they said in unison. Naruto raised a brow and took another step forward before stopping and smiling at the twins. "What's up, you two? What can I help you with?" he asked, crossing his arms. Taiki and Daiki shared a look with each other, before looking back at Naruto. "We've been training non-stop since we got here." Daiki started speaking first. "Now, it's been 7 months. And we were wondering how far we could push ourselves while fighting you." Taiki took over as Naruto darted his eyes from one to the other. Naruto gave a sigh as he noticed the turn of events. He uncrossed his arms and clenched his fists. "Okay, let's get this over with. I wanna enjoy the rest of the day in complete leisure," he said as the twins looked at each other and nodded. Quickly, the two rushed the blonde. Naruto took a quick stance and twisted and turned his body, evading each of the duo's perfectly timed strikes. The blonde quickly jumped back further away from them. The twins quickly followed, but the blonde was able to use that time to go on his counter-offensive. He struck at Taiki first, jabbing him in his shoulder and then throwing a straight to his face. His jab connected, but Daiki grabbed his wrist and tried to a surprise kick into the blonde's sternum. Naruto used his small size to his advantage and jumped over the leg, twisting his body horizontally in the air as he also used that moment to kick Daiki on the forehead. He was rewarded with Daiki releasing his wrist, but as he landed Taiki was on him immediately, attempting to close the tenketsu around the blonde's shoulders. Naruto was forced to backpedal in an attempt to escape the barrage of strikes from the Hyuga. Daiki joined his brother and attacked the blonde in perfect synchrony. Naruto's ice darted from side to side, between the two as he weaved around and between each of the strikes. He was having difficulty once again from their unique gentle fist style of fighting. He'd only fought against the style once before, against Neji, and it was only him. Now against two of this widely proclaimed style of fighting was beginning to grate on the blonde's nerves. His eyes shifted to amber on pure instincts as he immediately found an opening. He slapped Taiki's hand away by the wrist, moving quickly as he stepped between them, ducking under Daiki's strike. He struck the man's solar plexus and turned his attention towards Taiki, while Daiki had the wind knocked out of him. He moved quickly under Taiki's next attack, and quickly hit him 3 times. Once in the sternum, the second one hit his solar plexus and the third was a double palm to his chest. Once Taiki was launched backwards, the blonde turned his attention to Daiki, who was still doubled over from the earlier strike just a second ago. He hopped back and his eyes returned to normal and he smiled. "Well, that just happened," he said, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. "Whoops, my bad. I went a little overboard there." Taiki groaned as he sat up and shakily stood to his feet. While Daiki was faring a bit better as he held his stomach. "No need to apologize, this is what the fight is for. Come on, we can still do this." Naruto was about to give his response, when he heard the yelling of his name. "Damn, I'm popular this morning," he muttered to himself as he turned his head to see his friend C. At first the fellow blonde was jealous that he was connecting with the Raikage on such a level. But after a while, it was made clear to him that Naruto needed the Raikage as a teacher, just as much as the Raikage needed Naruto as a student. Without either of them being together as student and teacher, then the both of them would be extremely bored with their lives. The Raikage's bodyguard caught up to the younger blonde and waved at him. "I finally found you. Raikage-sama has something for you to do," C said, laughing softly as he already felt the annoyance coming from Naruto. Naruto groaned, rubbing down his face in exhaustion. "Fine, I'll go there," he mutters as he starts walking away with C by his side. There goes my vacation. I'll see you two next time we meet. He spoke louder in order for the twin Hyuga to hear him. They nodded their heads in unison and faced each other. We might as well work on what we know so we can defeat Naruto next time. Daiki told his brother as they nodded once more and began training with each other. Ki. The two blondes were nearing the entrance of the Raikage building, when a thought came to Naruto's mind. Wait, so what does Sensei want with me? He asked, turning his head to look at C. C turned his head to see the scar across the young blonde's whisker marks. He shrugged his shoulders. He just wanted me to get you. You'll learn what he wants once you get to him, he said, chuckling, noticing they had stopped moving. Naruto chuckled as well and gave a lazy salute to his superior. I'll see you later then, C, he said before walking inside of the building, while C went on to do his own thing. After a few minutes, the blonde stood outside of A's office. Honestly, he thought about knocking politely, but that's not him at all. He opened the door, effectively barging inside. I swear I can't enjoy one day to myself. What's up this time, Sensei? The whiskered blonde asked with a loud sigh. For the first time Naruto has known the man, seemed to be deep in concentration. Paperwork was in front of him and he didn't have a single dumbbell around his person. Mabui, his cute assistant, was standing near him, more paperwork in her arms. It seemed that she was always carrying some paperwork with her. The blonde was surprised to find that he was ignored as A hadn't raised his head to look at him. Mabui did spare him a glance and a soft smile, before she too returned her attention to the Raikage's hands on the papers. Naruto looked on at the phenomenon and walked over to the desk and sat in the chair, not making any form of noise that could have disturbed the man and his important work. He watched closely, paying close attention to the way the man's eyes darted horizontally and vertically across each sheet of paper, before making his decision on what to do with that document. He was sure he was sitting the chair for the last 30 minutes before A finally glanced at him. It only lasted a moment, before his eyes were back on his work. Naruto tilted his head a bit, silent as he watched his sensei. Another 30 minutes went by in silence. The only noise was the bustling of the village outside of the office, the random advisements of Mabui and the occasional mutter from A. This was actually relaxing for the blonde. He got to learn how a Kage gets his paperwork done and he had a beautiful woman in his company. Just as he began to visibly relax into his seat, A stood to his feet. All right Naruto, let's get down to business. Naruto groaned in disappointment as he stood just as he was getting comfortable. All right, old man, what do you want me to do? A looked at Naruto with a stern look, his usual angry persona non-existent in his gaze. It's a mission of utmost importance. A mission only you can complete for me.